And now, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, a movie good enough where that should matter more than the omnipresent stupid questions where the answers don't matter and have already been answered anyway, hovering over it, but probably won't. Those, of course, would be questions like, does James Gunn still have it? No, he doesn't. They put him in charge of the next 10 years of production at DC because somebody lost a bet. Is Marvel Studios back? Back from where? I thought people were still whining that they released too much stuff in this most recent run. Or are we still doing that kabuki dance where peaks and valleys in box office over 20 fucking years between almost a billion, and then slightly less than a billion, but still more than basically everyone else would still kill for is indicative anything other than chronological time is still anything resembling a take. You know, because, sorry, I've been going over some old material for retrospectives, and it's amazing how long stupid people will say the same fucking shit over and over again. Anyway, speaking of not the same shit over and over again, the road has been long and winding, and the trip has been even stranger than one could have imagined when this extremely strange series started, but here at the end, the fact remains that, yeah, Guardians of the Galaxy has stayed throughout maybe the most unique and also quintessential Marvel Studios production, the feature most apart from the others, but also still in hindsight even more than the Avengers, the movie that set up the full picture of what a Marvel movie was, and what almost every truly successful one, and all of the other films that have tried to copy the formula, have tried to be ever since. It really can't be overstated the degree to which James Gunn and his associates cracked the codes, and how many codes there were to crack. Fun and or funny with deep pathos will get you more mileage than being self-serious about things, even with comic book movies. In fact, especially with comic book movies, characters need personality more than they need backstory or lore, and when in doubt, treat the source material less like holy scripture that you have to adhere to with any kind of sanctity, and more like you're raiding a party city for costumes and decorations to theme out a birthday party. This is, was, now has been, and perhaps ever shall be the best of the Marvel trilogies from the guy who was clearly the best of the filmmakers who hit big within the Marvel machinery, despite having had a whole career lifespan of his own before that, and it's both a profound act of justice and a grand sweep of symbolism that he gets to sign out on his own damn terms with a final entry that's easily the best of its own saga, a new gold standard of S-tier Marvel, and maybe, well, the more I think on it, probably the best Marvel Cinematic Universe period as of now. It is definitely the most emotionally affecting and easily the darkest and most thematically taxing thing the studio's released in ages, maybe ever. The early reviews opining that the scenes and subject matter relating to animal cruelty and just how relentlessly hard it opts to drive home that point about how bad its bad guys are and why are not being over the top about that at all, even if I don't necessarily agree at all that it renders the film somehow less good or necessarily inappropriate for younger audiences innately compared to a lot of what the studio puts out otherwise, but it's absolutely the grimmest place they've taken actual villainy to since back in Phase 1, and if you remember, back in Phase 1, the actual villains included, you know, actual Nazis. The main plot concerning the previously untold origin story for Rocket Raccoon now revealed to involve perennial Marvel nemesis, the High Evolutionary, appearing in the comics as a basically, Dr. Moreau from space, and here reconceived by actor Chakotay Uiji as still basically that, but with magic woo and space lasers aspect cranked a little bit down, and the animal vivisection and callous eugenesis aspect cranked to 11 and left running, so we'll get the point. I mean, it's an old cliche that if you want audiences to just fucking hate a villain, make them kick a puppy, and that's this guy's thing for the entire movie. And crossed with Iwuji just being an excellent actor and Gunn having a really strong sense of exactly where he wants to take this character, and why this is probably the best Marvel villain in ages, but also the most detestable, hateable, evil son of a bitch bad guy in any movie out in a while. Like, if you were one of the people who came out of Puss in Boots going, oh man, Jack Horner's great, why can't more villains just be total bastards again? The monkey's paw might have heard you on that one, guys. Rocket being very much the thematic, if not screen time focus this time around, and let's be clear about this, one of the main reasons it feels like one of the upper deck Marvel features is that it's one of the entries set up to be definitively about something and have something to say, in this case, animal testing bad. But it doesn't leave the other characters shortchanged at all, even if I fully expect a few people will be puzzled that newcomer Adam Warlock is mostly a secondary villain plot complicator guy here. He was a big deal in the comics at one point. If you ask people in their 40s like me, we might be a little fuzzy as to explaining why exactly that was, but yeah, he was. Basically think of him being where Nebula was in the first one, right down to I'll be more important somewhere else later, but he is fun here, and Will Poulter is interestingly used. Otherwise, this is a story about dealing with your baggage and figuring out whether to move on or settle down because everything changes, while also being about people deserving second chances, but also about how powerful people who talk a good game at building sterile, happy utopias are also usually monsters who will happily throw away those with imperfections and quirks that are deemed inconvenient to the project, even though they make it possible in the first place. Hey, I think James Gunn might be a little more salty about Marvel and how things went down between himself and the studio than he was immediately apparent about. But yeah, pretty much everyone does get an arc here. Star-Lord is trying to cope with how fucked up the situation across Infinity War and Endgame left his situation, or lack thereof, with the new version of Gamora. Drax and Nebula are experiencing the uneasy realization that they're now the adults in the room, whether they want to be or not. Groot is, okay, still Groot, and Mantis has a fun but also very affecting arc of exploring what happens when the healer empath of a team finally starts to get sick of everyone else's constant bullshit. It's all a big extended metaphor about the franchise reaching a conclusion and letting these characters, all defined by damage and trauma, find endings or at least checkpoints of emotional growth to this point in their story without having to impose locked-in markers of no coming back from this onto a narrative inorganically or by force, which might be the most surprising thing about a story that's otherwise built out of so much pain and heartache. But in terms of the deliberately straightforward plot, Rocket sustains a mortal injury at the hands of Adam Warlock, the superhuman servant of the gold-skinned Sovereign bad guys hatched from that cocoon way back in the postscript to the sequel, if you forgot at this point, since the Sovereign were a red herring that time in the first place, and the Guardians have to track down the origins he always refused to talk about previously in order to save him. This leads into a conflict with the High Evolutionary, who has since set himself up as a mad scientist space god, building entire planets of genetically engineered species he creates, maintains, and disposes of with contemptible cruelty, ultimately leading the heroes into a civilizational rescue mission with existential implications for themselves and their own found family, on top of trying to save just one raccoon, whose even worse than you thought they might be origins they finally come to understand in full. You know, guys, I gotta be honest, I've somewhat given up trying to put a comprehensive understanding to how the rest of popular culture reacts to these movies, both because it's a loser's game trying to extrapolate culture trends based on vibes and emotions when you're in the middle of it versus after when you've got a real picture, apart from the obvious stuff like I don't really believe in superhero fatigue, Marvel fatigue, wokeness versus anti-wokeness being real things because they aren't, and also because I have a functioning brain and evolved after the discovery of fire. But I walked away from this one having watched something that really felt like it mattered in a way that I haven't from a major studio product in a long time, and I'm still pretty much there. So wherever you are with the Marvel stuff, or just big theatrical movies period, where maybe you don't feel like you've seen one with substance in a while that leads you to come away feeling like the time you spent was more than just a distraction, this is the one you've been waiting for. For me, it's a 10 out of 10, the best of the trilogy, and very possibly the new best of the Marvel films. If the crowds don't turn out for this one, it's the audience that let the movie down, because this is an absolute stunner.